Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to hearing number 12 for the proposed Selwyn District Plan. The topic today is activities on the surface of water. And just before we hear from our first submitter from the 42A reporting team. Anything for us this morning?
Not this morning, thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you very much. All right, well, Regional Council, good morning and welcome. That's interesting. All right, you've been before us a number of times, so I don't need to tell you the drill, but thank you very much for the legal submissions that you've lodged. We've read those, so you don't need to read them out. You're very welcome to highlight key points, and we might have a few questions for you. And you don't have to have your mask on when you're speaking unless you wish to keep it on. Of course, you can keep it on if you wish to.
Very helpful, thank you, and good morning. So as you said, you have read the legal submissions for the Canterbury Regional Council. The focus of the submissions is really around the role and responsibilities of the Regional Council and the District Council, and the purpose of lodging the submissions was to confirm that the District Council does actually have a role in respect of managing the activities on surface water and managing the adverse effects of Indigenous biodiversity, and in the particular context of Te Waihora. And the managing the adverse effects of motorised watercraft on Indigenous biodiversity, that is something that can be managed by the District Council through the District Plan. So that was the key focus of the submissions, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Great, thank you very much. Lindsay, any questions?
Thank you. Just in terms of the roles and responsibilities, you've clearly outlined the role of the Regional Council and the District Council. Do you know if there's any collaboration between the councils about an overall resource management package, about whether they, on what may or may not happen on Te Waihora in the future?
In respect of these activities?
Yes, well, in terms of the entire management, because to me it seems quite integrated. There's, even though you've got different agencies with different responsibilities, it seems like there is a package of things which need to be managed in terms of Te Waihora. So did you have any comment on what has happened in the past in terms of collaboration between the agencies at all?
I'm not, I don't know that I can be particularly useful to you on the specifics of that. I do know that the councils do work together and work collaboratively, but I'm not able to provide you with any detail on that.
Okay. And in terms of this extinguishment of existing use rights that you've got in your evidence, can you perhaps walk me through that again? I'm just a little bit unclear about the whole Section 10 issues with regard to this. It seems like there's a bit of an exception relating to the activities on the surface of water.
Yes, so in relation to the activities on the surface of water, that operates in a similar way to regional council rules in Section 20A in the Act.
Yep.
So once a rule in a plan becomes operative, a person who has an existing use has 6 months in which to lodge a resource consent application, and during that time can continue their existing use. And once that resource consent is determined, they can either, if it's granted, continue to operate under their resource consent, or if it's not granted, then their existing use rights are extinguished. And likewise, if there's a prohibited activity rule, then obviously you cannot obtain consent for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm just thinking at the more micro level how this might be managed. There could be a number of existing people who might take out a small tinny or something like that on the lake and so forth. And if there is a potential restriction or potential prohibition on that, how that's going to work from a practicality and enforcement perspective.
Yes, so in that instance, there would obviously need to be some good communications around that if there is to be a requirement for a resource consent, and managing that process so it is as efficient as possible to obtain a consent. And if it is a prohibited activity, then obviously consent cannot be obtained. So that's a different process around communicating and enforcement.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Vet, any questions?
Kia ora and Tanakwi. I appreciate you weren't quite clear in terms of the collaboration I heard across the councils. I was thinking more in terms of the motorised vehicles that are currently on the lake. In particular, how that might actually be managed, the commercial side. I'm thinking about the Ngaitahu quota system that's on the lake. Has there been much thought? Has the council had much thought and how that might be managed?
In respect of the particular, how the rule regime might work and therefore how that may actually be implemented, no, we haven't got to that point. I think there's still consideration of what activity should be managed on the lake first. And it's certainly something that the regional council would be happy and willing to work with the district council and other groups and entities involved to in terms of the implementation of whatever framework is in the district plan.
I note in here that regional council and acknowledges the significance of the lake to mana whenua. Where does the regional council see mana whenua's role in terms of looking at should this be administered or need to be administered? Has there been any thought or discussion around that?
I'm not aware of any particular thought or discussion, but that's not to say that that hasn't taken place. I haven't been part of that discussion, but I'm given the way that the Regional Council and mana whenua do work together and work in partnership, I'm sure that would be something that would be worked through in the future in the context of whatever management regime is in place for the lake.
Okay. Your attachment in terms of the the speed zones, looking at around Harts Creek and looking around the Department of Conservation land that we've got around there in terms of the reserve. Can you just clarify for me a little bit more about that 5 knot area? And so when you come further out, so just explain a little bit more in terms of that safety factor in the 5 knot area that regional council do actually have control over. Can you just explain around the lake?
Around the lake. So in terms of the speed limit that's been set under the navigation safety bylaw, there is the wildlife reserve, which I understand is a no boating area. And then there is a 5 knot speed limit in the area that's highlighted yellow on the map. And then also within 200 metres of shore, but beyond 200 metres, there's that speed limit doesn't apply.
I appreciate that your attachment 1 is covering around the Harts area and the Timberyard Point area. I'm thinking further afield and thinking about those commercial boats of needing to get out, even recreation in terms of getting out. The Kohanga area that's over towards the I'm thinking of management around the whole lake and that 5 knot area and how that might actually be managed. Has the regional council thought about widening that safety aspect and working alongside other councils and district council in terms of how that might be worked for some certainty with recreation users?
I'm not aware of any particular discussions in the context of maritime safety under the navigation safety bylaw. It has there has been a review of that bylaw in the last couple of years, but I'm not aware of any particular discussions with the harbour master. So I'm sorry, I'm not able to assist you.
So it would be, would you agree then that it would be totally new in terms of looking at section 10A if we were to look across, right across Waihora?
In terms of section 10A, in terms of rules in the district plan, I understand that it would be a new approach in terms of this district plan. And I'm not sure in terms of the navigation safety bylaw when that was promulgated, how widely the whole lake management was looked at in that respect.
Kia ora, thank you.
Malcolm?
Yeah, just as you're aware, and you've noted in your submissions to us, the City Council has a different regulatory approach for the area that they control over the lake. Does the Regional Council and the City Council monitor the way in which motorboating is happening in that area of the lake, do you know?
In respect of the Regional Council's navigation safety function, the Harbour Master's office would have a role in monitoring the activity on the lake. But yeah, I'm sorry, okay. I don't have any specifics on that for you.
And yes, the Regional Council's responsibility is for activities on this on the water surface, on the water itself, not the land. Is it not possible for the Regional Council in the RPS to include something that would stop access to the lake by motorised craft?
So in the regional policy statement, there could be direction provided around those activities, but it would be up to the district council with its functions and its district plan to impose rules in respect of that, to implement it.
Yes, and there's no direction there at this present time, is there?
No specific direction around the use of motorised watercraft on.
Thank you.
Oops. So just full disclosure, I was a Canterbury Regional Council Hearings Commissioner on the plan change for Selwyn Te Waihora for the Land and Water Regional Plan. So I'm very familiar with the lake and its biodiversity and cultural values. So just a question from your para 28. We refer to the rule regime that the City Council has in place on its half of the lake. So just to clarify, so the Regional Council is supporting as far as possible, consistent approach for the whole lake in terms of this issue?
I think there are, that is one aspect to it. The Regional Council is seeking that the recreational uses be limited as far as practicable, recognising the benefits in having a consistent approach across the lake. So consistency with the Christchurch District planning framework. But what does need to be considered and weighed is the biodiversity benefits of further restrictions on the watercraft versus the consistency with the Christchurch District Plan approach.
Yeah. And just following up further on the attachment to your legal submission, so if we were of a mind to recommend a rule regime for the Selwyn District Council's half of the lake, it would need to accommodate the activities at Timberyard Point, wouldn't it? The jet skis and the water skiing activities, as well as the matters that are listed in your para 28.
Yes, it would have to consider those.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you staying till the end of this hearing, or are you heading off shortly?
I was going to stay and,
Yeah, good.
and hear the rest of the
Good, because
presentations.
there's a matter I'd like to bring to your attention and the other submitters as well, and following on from your offer to work collaboratively with the councils on an issue. So I'll have a request, if not a direction, on that at the end of the hearing. So, but thank you very much for coming in. Christchurch City Council, Mr. Lightbody.
Morning.
Good morning. So good morning, Mr. Lightbody. I don't think you've appeared at one of these hearings before, so just for your benefit, thank you very much for initially lodging the submission and the part that you played in that, and then also for the written evidence that you've provided. We've read that, so you don't need to read that out loud to us, but you're very welcome to highlight any key points that you wish to draw to our attention, and then I'll see if we have questions for you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Not David, great summary to talk to, just really to highlight the role the city plays in its interest in Te Waihora Lake Ellesmere, and that we obviously also have control of half the lake and have rules over that, and just really like to see a consistent approach over our natural resources is obviously significant, and that's all really.
Great, thanks very much. Lindsay, questions for Mr. Lightbody?
Thank you, Mr. Lightbody. In terms of your relief that you're proposing, it's mainly to the policy and also to the rule. But if we look at the rule first, your submission is that, or your request is that Te Waihora actually be included as a specified lake within that rule. But what you can do as of right on those scheduled lakes are relatively restrictive in terms of the remainder of the rule. How would that rule be able to accommodate the existing levels of activity? We talked about Timberyard Point just then, in terms of recognising and providing for those existing activities in the rule framework, where essentially it says at the moment, if Te Waihora was in there, is very much restricted to conservation type activities as opposed to any other recreational activities or potentially some recreational fishing, for example. Do you have any comment on how that would be managed in that framework? Because if you don't comply with that rule, I think you go to prohibited activity.
Yeah, that definitely wouldn't be appropriate. There needs to be a certain framework to enable effects to be considered on that point. But yes, there would have to be a framework implemented there.
Okay. All right. I don't have any further questions, but I think the chair's alluded that there may be some follow-up work accepted too. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Have you any questions, Mr. Lightbody?
Kia ora, and thank you for your submission. No, I'm fine. I was also thinking about those restrictions when you looked across, so I'm waiting for those.
Thanks. And Malcolm.
Yes, in the same vein of the questions I asked the previous submitter, section 611, you're talking about monitoring and enforcement of activities on the lake. How does the City Council monitor the activities under their current regulatory regime that they have now?
Yeah, so talking to our compliance and monitoring team, there has been no reactive monitoring. So there has been a consent required since 2017 when the district plan was implemented, made operative.
Right.
But they proactively watch as they're cruising past is the answer. And we're quite lucky in that there's no jet ski lanes on that side of the lake, which would prompt a resource consent. All other activities there are generally permitted. in the first instance.
Okay. The reason why I asked is the lake is huge, and any regulation would mean that enforcing it would be somewhat difficult. And if you're not able to enforce it, perhaps there's not a point in having it. So that's just my point I was wanting to make. Thank you.
So Mr. Lightbody, just following up on that last issue, I didn't quite catch your answer. So the current City Council's monitoring regime, is it, did you say a reactive one? So
At the
is that
moment,
complaints
yes.
driven or?
Yes, complaints driven, yeah.
And does the City Council have staff on the ground at any stage observing activities in the absence of complaints?
Not at the moment, no.
At the moment. And just while it's on my mind, should we be of a mind to recommend a rule regime for the Selwyn District Council side of the lake? And you may not be able to answer this, and if you can't, I'm happy for you to come back at a later stage once you've talked to whoever you need to talk to. But would the City Council be amenable to undertaking a compliance role over the entire lake under some sort of contractual arrangement, since you've been in that mode since 2017?
I'd have to get back to you on that, yeah.
Can you make a note of that? Now, I've just got a couple of questions arising from your evidence. Just wait for you to write that down. And for any of these questions, I've got 3 or 4 questions for you. If you're not comfortable to answer them or you simply don't know, that's fine. And I'm happy for you to come back to writing later on. So looking at your para 4.2 and the very bottom part of that paragraph on your page 3. So in terms of not complying with a permitted activity under the CCC regime, and you flick into restricted discretionary, does that apply on a sort of a individual vessel basis, or does it apply at a club level? Do you know, like does...
I'd have to get back to you on that one.
Yeah, just
in terms of the city plan.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does it work? Is it individual boats, vessels, or say would a club be able to gain a generic consent for its members?
Of an area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just interested in how that might work.
Yep.
And so just at your 6.7, so the city plan permits the activities that you list there. So what other activities that currently occur on the lake, not necessarily on the city side of the lake, would be of concern to the city, do you think?
Generally, like the jet ski,
Skis?
recreation, skiing activities.
Yeah.
Because generally the speeds used are a lot larger than a recreational boating, fishing type setup.
Yeah, so that's jet skis and water skiing.
Yeah.
And do you know, and again, you may not know, and that's fine, how prevalent is that at the moment? Is that a regular thing, or is it a sort of an occasional activity? Do you know?
An answer,
Yeah,
sorry,
you happy to ask your on the ground staff about that? Okay. No, they were the only questions I had. And are you staying till the end of the hearing as well? Good. All right. Thanks very much, Mr. Lightbody, for coming in, providing your evidence and answering our questions. So the next submitter on my list is Jet Boating New Zealand. Good morning, Mr. Smith, is it?
Good morning, panel. Yes, it is.
Thank you. So I don't think you provided written material this morning, and that's absolutely fine. So happy to hear your verbal
Yes.
presentation or anything that you wish to outline to us.
Yeah, sure. And for the purposes of this presentation, I have written down a very brief sort of summary of just the comments that I wish to make, and I'm quite happy just to provide the panel with with that document.
Yep, that'd be great. Thank you.
It'll be very easy to read, trust me. Right, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to just come and address the panel. Jet Boating New Zealand, or JBNZ as I'll refer to them, really appreciate the opportunity to participate in these processes, and I might say that they are looking to do so in a far greater way than perhaps has traditionally been the case. So this is really quite a minor matter in the context of where the district plan review, but JBNZ wanted me to come along and just talk to our submission more as a courtesy to the process, and just about to answer any questions. So my name's Malcolm Smith. I'm an advisor to JBNZ in respect of just resource management and other regulatory matters that impact on recreational jet boating just throughout New Zealand. I'm not a qualified planner, but I do hold professional qualifications in land development and subdivision type matters. And I've got quite a lot of experience with resource management kind of matters as they relate to that property development. So I have a pretty broad, although not an expert, understanding of RMA type things. So please bear that in mind if you ask me lots of difficult questions. So JBNZ, through their submission, broadly supports where the proposed district plan is going, with the exception of those identified high country lakes. We understand recreational jet boating is a permitted activity on the surface of the water, and that continues from the let's call it the existing district plan. JBNZ considers that very important. They would use the term essential, as it enables the recreational jet boating activities to continue to occur in the district without undue regulation and process. So that's great. JBNZ considers that recreational jet boating activities may not result in significant adverse effects on the waterway systems and the fauna found within the same. Recreational jet boats navigate a waterway and may provide some measure of disturbance of the water, riverbed and the immediate riparian margins. However, this may not present as either adverse or significant in the context of the system or the fauna. That said, JBNZ appreciates the characteristics and values associated with the high country lakes within the Selwyn district. It has no interest in undue disturbance to these waterways or the fauna within and about the same, resulting from jet boating activities. So the issue is the circumstance of the recreational jet boating activity and the circumstance of the waterway system. And if there is a potential for significant adverse effects, the matter should be how to manage the activity in a manner that suitably mitigates that adverse effect. So JBNZ feel that for the high country lakes that are prohibiting recreational jet boating activities is excessive. This is, as we understand it, an absolute activity status and provides no scope to enable the activity, albeit in a properly managed manner, that may suitably mitigate the adverse effects. So our submission is therefore just to seek a reconsideration of the activity status, and the suggestion was to have it as a non-complying activity rather than a prohibited activity. So this provides some opportunity to enable recreational jet boating via resource consent and subject to strong controls and thoughtful consideration of potential adverse effects. And in doing so, giving proper consideration of the circumstances of the environment. So that hearings panel is the substance of the submission. We just believe that changing that activity status would be appropriate, and we're also very thoughtful of the potential precedent effect with having a prohibited activity status, insofar as we're aware that other districts with their district plans seem to take on a consistent approach for neighbouring districts, and we just think that if Selwyn district maintains the prohibited activity status, that might then create the circumstance where other districts do so, more for consistency and not necessarily recognising the circumstances of the activity and the circumstances of the waterways. I'd have to say that JBNZ doesn't have any particular interest in continuing the discussion or the debate, and we're actually just quite happy just to provide the feedback to council as part of this process. So please don't think that we're going to be running off to the Environment Court or anything like that. We just really want to make that point that we're very happy to have the permitted activity status for waterways in general, and we would just seek a reconsideration of the activity status for those high country lakes to a non-complying activity. And Commissioners, I was just listening to the previous submitter, and there was a question just regarding the circumstances whereby you would then apply for a resource consent for that activity. And I think the question was whether it would be done on an individual basis or whether it might be done within a collective or club basis. This is something Jet Boating New Zealand has talked about a little bit in recent times, and the extension of our submission, where if there was a non-complying activity status, our view is that JBNZ as an organisation would seek that resource consent, so that it would be applicable to members of Jet Boating New Zealand only. The thought being that a member of our organisation should reasonably be subscribing to the thoughts and the processes incumbent with being a member of that organisation, and therefore it would seem that there is a reasonable opportunity to be able to regulate the activities through that membership in a way that wouldn't likely be possible if it was just individualized. So if we go to non-complying, and if in the circumstances a resource consent is sought, it would be very much a resource consent to JBNZ as an organisation, and with members only being able to have the exercise of that permission. So panel, that's it from me, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Smith. Lindsay, any questions?
Thank you for that. Couple of things. In terms of the list of the lakes, the high country lakes that there are those, and I certainly don't know all of them, but are they set up for jet boaters to, is there a boat ramp, for example, in each of them where you can actually get a jet boat in?
I'm not familiar with all of the lakes either, but I would understand that very few would have a let's call it a formalised opportunity for access. Having said, recreational jet boating and the people that do boat, they're quite used to launching and retrieving boats, let's call it from just the natural water's edge.
Okay, So, but your submission is that if somebody wanted to potentially use one of these lakes for jet boating purposes, that they should be given the opportunity to apply for resource consent as opposed to a blanket prohibition, considering the values that they were expressed in and certainly the background documentation for this particular subject.
Yeah, correct. That there should be an opportunity as opposed to an absolute prohibition.
Yeah, so potentially you're looking at also extending the exceptions as well, because that rule has exceptions relating to scientific investigations and law enforcement, emergency services, etc. So you're basically looking at an extension of that list as well to provide for jet boating.
No, we would rely on the process of applying for and obtaining a resource consent to then be the vehicle to consider the activity as it's proposed, the characteristics and the circumstances of the waterway, and the resource consent then provides the opportunity for the controls through conditions and the like to then balance the activity and the effects of the activity with and the mitigations that would then be sought with the receiving environment being the waterway and its surroundings.
So what, just on that point, what sort of mitigations would be available to jet boaters?
Well, I don't know if I can answer that.
Well, if you're looking at a high country lake, for example, and you pop a jet boat in and you do your jet boating on that lake, well, what sort of mitigation is therefore available to look at the particular ecological effects that there may be?
There could be controls on the time through the year that boating might occur, and for example, it's very normal for jet boating activities to be limited to exclude salmon spawning seasons and this sort of thing. There could be restrictions on the location of any launching and retrieval. And there could be restrictions on just the hours of the day that boating might be possible.
Okay, so there's potential for a bit of nuancing in terms of the operations.
Yes.
Okay. And the final question is, there's a bit of a theme that Te Waihora, like Ellesmere, should also be included in this list. And knowing that there is some boating activity which is already established there, have you got any views on whether that be appropriate, or is that a different case to the high country lakes?
Yes, the latter. Jet Boating New Zealand has not considered to any extent boating activities on Lake Ellesmere. So this is a submission purely in respect of the high country lakes as identified in the proposed plan. We make no comment about Lake Ellesmere.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Yvette?
Kia, I just want to take it just a little bit, another step from the looking at how you might regulate the users in the high country lakes, on the high country lakes, given the significance and the vulnerability of those lakes. How would you regulate your members? Do you regulate your members?
We do regulate members insofar as we have some, let's call it, I was going to use the term code of ethics, but that's probably not the right term. But we have some goals that are very broad and just generally describe, the circumstances of recreational jet boating. We have a very strong branch base within JBNZ where boating is partly carried out on a sort of, let's call it a club event basis. And within those club events, there is, I would suggest, a very strong measure of control as to how the boats operate, both within the environment and also close to each other. So it's not a let's jump in the boat and just go for a free for all with club events. It is, I would suggest, very well regulated, and it's the boating activities are carried out, in my opinion anyway, in a very respectful way. Having said, members can jump into a boat and as an individual or just let's call it a non-club event, they can go and undertake jet boating. So there is not a great deal of control in that circumstance, but we would hope that members would subscribe to boating controls in a similar way as if they were on a club activity. But I can't say that we go around and police everybody to the nth degree. I guess the extension to it, though, is that if there are any issues, then it seems that the people that are charged with investigating those very quickly come to JBNZ and ask whether those activities have been carried out by members, and are we aware of it? And I can certainly say to you that JBNZ, both at a national and club level, take very seriously any feedback, particularly if it's adverse, and are very proactive to go and both talk to members and to educate them as necessary.
So then in your discussions with the members and the executive to get you to this point today, looking at reliance on using the consenting process, was there a discussion in terms of that consenting process, whether it was event-based or it was for a duration period? Was there a discussion amongst your members in terms of what their preference might be in terms of the type of consent they would apply for?
No, we haven't looked into it to that depth. We've simply recognised that the proposal is for prohibition, and we have taken the view that we would like to bring that matter to the table, and if the outcome of that is that the activity could then be seen to be non-complying, we'd be more than happy then just to journey through that process to consider let's call it the details associated with any resource consents that might be gathered. But as I said to you before, and JBNZ has considered this whole issue of seeking resource consents to allow activities. The view at this stage is that they would be a resource consent in the name of JBNZ for the benefit of its members only. And I suppose the extension to that is that if somebody was carrying out that activity and they weren't a member of JBNZ, well then I'm sure that there's some enforcement actions that are able to be undertaken, and I don't think JBNZ would have any difficulty with enforcement actions on people if they didn't do the right thing, if I can describe it like that.
And just finally, Mana Whenua have a huge involvement with the High Lakes in terms of working with the agencies and the people that operate in the high country areas. And I was just wondering in terms of the organisation itself, working with mana whenua, on other matters, good relationship there.
Again, I can't offer a great deal of comment, but I do know that JBNZ as an organisation is very happy to sit down and be part of any discussions around us. And I use the term the strategic table to then recognise, the views and the interests of other organisations in waterways, jet boating activities and other activities on the surface of water. So I think I'm I could be very happy to say that JBNZ would have no difficulty in being part of those types of discussions, so that we can recognise the interests and values of other users of those areas.
Kia ora and thank you.
Malcolm. So, Mr. Smith, just one question from me, and forgive me, I can't recall from my background reading what the current regulatory regime is for surface water activities on these high country lakes. But the rule in contention this morning is that ASW Rule R1.3, which lists 17 high country lakes. Which, if any, of those high country lakes are currently used by jet boaters?
I'm sorry, I can't tell you that.
Can you find out and come back to us on that?
Yes, I can.
Yep. Great. And so if you could just provide that answer in writing to one of our hearing administrators, that would be helpful.
Yeah. What I can say is that I'll research the existing circumstances for the uplifting of the maritime speed restriction, which is half of the equation, and then also address the RMA side of it. So very happy to pass that through over the next few days.
Yeah, I'm simply interested to know if any of those lakes are currently used by jet boaters.
I suspect they aren't.
Yeah, I suspect they aren't either, but I'd just like you to confirm that.
Yes, very happy.
Yeah. Right, thanks very much, Mr. Smith, for coming in.
Right, thank you very much.
And so just to the previous two submitters, as I've indicated earlier in my questions to you, I'd like you to undertake a little bit of work for us, if you don't mind. And so what I'd like to request, if you're willing to help us, and direct if you're not, that the three parties, the Regional Council, Christchurch City and Selwyn District Council officers, put their heads together and develop a rule for the Selwyn District Council side of Lake Ellesmere Te Waihora that is as consistent as possible with the existing Christchurch City Council rule, just bearing in mind the requirement in the RNA to be consistent with adjoining authorities as much as possible. But in doing so, to take a couple of matters into account. One is the Ms. Carruthers has highlighted in her information to us that the district plan here has some slightly different definitions than the Christchurch City plan. So when compiling wording for a rule for us to consider, if you could obviously look at the definitions and see if there's an issue there and trying to align the provisions that you come up with, and if not, and if the definitions aren't consistent, then put your mind to some kind of workaround for that. And secondly, to take into account the activities that the Regional Council Navigation and Safety Bylaw allows for at Timber Yard Point, mainly the jet skiing and the water skiing areas. Obviously, the rule, if any, would need to accommodate that activity as well, I presume. So just so the party's happy to do that little bit of work for us, and I'm not foreshadowing that that's where we won't go down, but I just want us to make an informed decision, and to help us make an informed decision, we need really to have the wording of a rule that would work in front of us. So happy to cooperate in that regard. Ms. Carruthers, yep. Timing wise, a couple of weeks. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah, if not, just say. I mean, and if when you put your heads together and you have a chat about when you might want to meet and do that work, if you think you need more time, that's fine. Just let the hearing administrator know. I'd rather you took the time and come back with a well thought out and comprehensive response rather than trying to stick to some arbitrary time frame. So if it dragged on for a little bit longer, that would be good, but I wouldn't like to see it take months rather than weeks. All right. Thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for everyone coming in and participating this morning and answering our questions. And we're now adjourned this part of the proceedings this morning. We reconvene at 10:45 for a hearing on designations.